Hi everyone. Today we are live with OWASP Karachi, another episode. Um, Today we will be talking about OWASP Nettacker, and we have we have with us our esteemed guest named Sam Stepanyan, and he would be talking about how would we be using OWASP Nettacker and its different things. So, Sam, how are you?
Hello, Sama. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can
Hi,
hear
hi.
you loud and
Good,
clear.
good to be at OWASP Karachi. Right. Shall I start by sharing my screen then?
Definitely,
Starting my
definitely. Please go
presentation.
ahead.
Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes, Sam, I can hear you.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Sam Stepanyan. I'm OWASP London Chapter Leader, and you can find me on Twitter at SecureStep9. Today I will be talking about OWASP Nettacker Project and how you can use it for recon and vulnerability scanning. So very quickly about me, as I said, I'm the OWASP London Chapter Leader. I also chair OWASP Chapter Committee, which is a committee which is aimed to help chapters all around the world to be healthy, successful, active, make sure they've got speakers and everything they need to make sure that the local OWASP chapters are successful. I'm an ex-developer myself. I come from software development background, but I work as an application security consultant in financial services in the City of London. So I am a defender. So why am I presenting a talk here about a tool which consists of words network and attacker? So my story with Nettacker started in 2017. Because I discovered that there is a project called OWASP Nettacker on the list of OWASP projects back in 2017. I decided to try it. I ran it. It displayed lots of different options on the command line. I didn't understand what it is. I didn't have any time to investigate what that project does. So I just decided not to look at it any longer. And little did I know, but in 2018, I actually had to meet that project again because I received an email from OWASP Nettacker project leaders saying, hello, OWASP London chapter leaders. We are supposed to be presenting Nettacker at Blackhat Europe 2018 conference, but we have a problem. We cannot get to London in time. Can you please present this project for us? And we said, okay, let's do this. So Dr. Greg Frakos and I, we had to learn this tool overnight. So we got on a Zoom session, just like this one, with Nettacker project leaders, and we learned the tool, and we loved it. We absolutely loved it. And we said, okay, let's go and present it. And then this happened. We had huge crowd of security consultants, penetration testers, bug bounty hunters gathering around our stand at the Blackhat Europe Arsenal station when we were presenting it, and everybody loved the tool. And we said, okay, this is great. So because the project was so good, I joined it and became a project co-leader in 2018. I started enhancing it a little bit, and we decided to take it to Blackhat Europe 2019, which happens in London every December. And then the same thing happened, even bigger crowd of security people gathered watching the demonstration of this tool. So what is it? Why is OWASP Nettacker attracting so many people? And what is so cool about it? So first of all, OWASP Nettacker is an open source software tool, just like all OWASP projects. And it assists in your penetration testing by automating information gathering tasks and vulnerability scanning tasks. The great thing about Nettacker is that it's written in Python. That means that it can run on Windows, Linux, or macOS, and generally anything which runs Python. I even tried running it on Raspberry Pi, and it ran absolutely fine. So another interesting thing for you to know about OWASP Nettacker is that it is a project under Google Summer of Code. And if you don't know what Google Summer of Code is, this is an initiative by Google where every year the students, active university students, can apply for internship. And essentially that is a paid internship that Google pays for. And the whole idea of this initiative that students spend their summer break working on an open source project. And there are various open source organizations participating in the Google Summer of Code initiative. OWASP participates as well, and quite a lot of OWASP tools, including OWASP JuShop, for example, or OWASP Zap, were actually enhanced by students who participated in Google Summer of Code. So we're quite lucky that we had students from Google Summer of Code who worked on this project. So for this year, by the way, I think you're already late for Google Summer of Code because it's summer. We already have students working. But next year, I suggest if anyone who is a student who is watching this presentation, or if you know someone who is a student, this is actually a great way to someone to spend their summer because this is an internship and you work on an open source project. Definitely do check it out, Google Summer of Code. I think applications start in March. So next March, you will be able to join next year's Google Summer of Code. So what is OWASP Nettacker? You can think of it as a Swiss Army knife. So just like Swiss Army knife, it's a tool consisting of many tools. And these tools are not necessarily compatible with each other, but can they all be used together? So OWASP Nettacker is a collection of tools. So it has a modular structure. You can create your own modules. It's an open source software. It has quite fast performance. It's using Python multi-threading to run all the modules. It's cool because it has customizable profiles, which are bundles of modules focused on a specific task. So basically, just like a Swiss Army knife, imagine you can group some of the blades which are aimed at specific tasks, and you can pull them all at the same time. And of course, the great advantage of Nettacker is automation, that you can automate it and run it from the command line. Having said all that, OWASP Nettacker is not a mature tool yet. It's not officially released yet. It's not even in beta. Its current version is version 0.02. And we're always looking for more contributors and people who can help enhance Nettacker. I will be speaking about it a little bit later. But what is great about Nettacker is that it has command line interface. It has a web UI, which is very useful. It has an API as well if you want to control your scans using API. It has a report generator. It has multi-go transforms, and currently it has over 70 modules. So where can you find Nettacker? You can find Nettacker on OWASP.org. This is the URL of the its OWASP website. And the actual documentation is located on the GitHub, on GitHub Wiki, and that's where the source code is as well. But quite frequently, people are asking, oh, how do I install it? And where's the documentation? And I know quite a lot of open source projects don't actually use the wiki button on the GitHub, and our project does. So all the documentation is there, and installation instructions can be accessed at the GitHub Wiki if you click on the installation bit. So let's talk about what is different about OWASP Nettacker and how it compares with other scanners. So if you look at scanners like Burp Suite or OWASP Zap, these are the well-known scanners that people know, which scan for various vulnerabilities. What these tools do, they usually would scan just one website for many web application vulnerabilities, and that's whatever the scanner is able to find. And usually both Burp and OWASP Zap, they would crawl one website to discover all URLs, all parameters, all forms, and it will try to find vulnerabilities on that one website. OWASP Nettacker is different. It can scan one website, but it is designed to scan one or many, and that could be hundreds or thousands, and that's IP addresses, networks, or subdomains, and Nettacker scans them for open ports or one or more specific vulnerabilities which are listed by the user. And you can bundle them in modules, and you can bundle them in profiles. So this is what is great and different about Nettacker. So how do you install it? OWASP Nettacker is on GitHub. So before you start installing the Python dependencies, please make sure that you install the operating system dependencies. Please do read the manual on the wiki. You can just install the latest version directly from GitHub by git cloning it. The URL is github.com/owasp/nettacker. And once you cloned it with Git, you just change directly to Nettacker and you can run pip install and install all the requirements. I'm not going to do it due to time constraints, but if you're interested, I do have a video on YouTube where you can find out how to install it on Kali Linux, and that's actually linked from the documentation wiki. You can also run it in Docker, which is really cool. So there isn't like an unofficial OWASP image yet. We're working on putting it into the OWASP's official Docker hub. You can pull my version, but actually what the best thing to do is actually compose your own. So once you've cloned Nettacker from GitHub, you can just use docker compose up command, and that will create your Docker version of Nettacker. And that is actually very, very useful because that means you can actually start using the tool straight away. And it's very quick to install. Before we proceed any further, because I will be doing a live demo, a reminder that OWASP Nettacker is actually an offensive security tool, and you shall not misuse this tool nor any other security tool for unauthorized access. And a reminder that performing security scans without permission from the owner of the computer system is illegal. Okay, so before we start looking at the actual demo, I wanted to tell you how Nettacker modules are structured. So remember when I launched Nettacker, it had lots of things on the command line, and I couldn't figure out what it is. But actually, it was showing Nettacker modules, and there are 3 types of Nettacker modules, so you could understand what this tool does. There's a module of type scan. So for example, Nettacker can perform a port scan. There is a module of type vuln. So this category of modules, they look for a vulnerability, specific vulnerability. For example, Apache Struts vuln would be an example of such module. And it has a module of type brute for brute forcing. So for example, SSH brute is an example of a brute forcing module. This is what's making Nettacker such a cool thing, because it combines these 3 different types of module. You perform scanning, you can perform vulnerability scanning for a specific vulnerability, and you can brute force. So all these 3 functionality in one. So here's the list of Nettacker scan modules. I highlighted some with an asterisk. For example, admin scan will find on the target if there are any administrative folders on the web server. CMS detection scan will detect content management systems, whatever is running, whether that's WordPress, Drupal, or Joomla. Directory scan is for directory brute forcing. So that's directory scanning to find out if there's any well-known directories on the target. ICMP scan can scan the whole network and check what is responding to ICMP requests. PMA scan, PMA stands for PHPMyAdmin. This is another very useful module that I used to find a lot of interesting things in bug bounty, because a lot of people leave PHPMyAdmin unsecured or leave it with default credentials. And Nettacker can actually help you to find PHPMyAdmin, and it can help you find it on the whole network, on all subdomains of a particular target. Port scan is, of course, similar to Nmap, just perform port scanning. Subdomain scan, so this is another very useful module. So if you know commands such as tools such as sublister or subfinder, Nettacker has that functionality built in, and it's implemented in Python. Again, I want to remind you, because Nettacker does not rely on any external tools. Everything is implemented internally in Python. And there are a few other interesting scanning modules as well. For example, WAPalyzer will show you what is available, what is running on the target using a WAPalyzer system. And you can also scan for vulnerable WordPress plugins or themes. There's also a useful module called WordPress user enumeration scan. So you can find out which users are configured in the target if it's running WordPress. There's a whole bunch of vulnerability modules as well. You can see there's Apache struts I've already mentioned. There's a whole bunch of modules on BFTPD. There's clickjacking, content security policy vulnerability, Heartbleed, course. So some interesting ones that I will be talking about is the server version vuln. So this is vulnerability where the target server is leaking its server version in the response banner, and SSL certificate expired vuln that shows you if the target site is running an expired SSL configuration. This is very useful again, especially for your, if you're scanning your internal network, you can find all the devices with expired SSL certificates, also quite useful for bug bounty. And a similar one is X-powered by vuln, so that will check if the web server is leaking its technologies that it's using, for example, a particular version of PHP or ASP.NET, and it's X-powered by vuln. So X-powered by a header. So this is these are the modules which will be looking for this particular vulnerability. And you can see there are some CVEs, for example, Citrix CVE, WordPress CVE, and we'll be talking about another interesting vulnerability module, CVE, which is very relevant these days in year 2021. And the brute forcing. So there are currently 8 brute forcing modules in Nettacker. So Nettacker can perform brute forcing using FTP protocol, using HTTP basic auth, using HTTP forms. So if you have a website which has a login and password, a username and password, Nettacker can brute force that. HTTP NTLM as well, SMTP for your mail service, SSH, which is very useful, Telnet for all the devices. I will be talking about why we have Telnet, because of the Internet of Things. And there's also a brute forcing module for WordPress XML RPC, which is useful for brute forcing WordPress accounts. Nettacker was originally called IoT Scan, and that is still its Twitter handle. That was the original name for it. When it was created, the people who originally created Nettacker, the intention was that they wanted to find IoT devices in the network and then scan IoT device for open ports and then brute force for things like default credentials. This is actually a very useful function which is still there, and you can use it. I recently used it for one of my client engagements where I had to use Nettacker to discover all the webcams, all the CCTV cameras. So this was a very large organization which had lots of webcams, and they didn't know how many webcams they have, and they didn't know how many of these webcams had default admin credentials. So I used Nettacker and I scanned that network, and I found around 200 cameras, and there were quite a few cameras which had admin as default username and password. And I think this is a very good use case for Nettacker. And again, if you have a situation like that, you know there's an open source tool that you can use for that kind of task. So the first module I want to talk about is port scanner. Again, probably a lot of people know about Nmap. So I would say that Nettacker is much easier to use than Nmap, and it could be faster because you can control how many threads and how many threads per host you want when you scan with it. As Nettacker is using Python multi-threading, you can easily control this. If you want to scan for the specific ports, you can add -g parameter, and what will happen is it will scan for, let's say, port 80 and 443. By default, Nettacker's port scanner only will scan for 1,000 most frequently used ports. So this is very similar to Nmap as well. Before we start running, I'm going to show you Nettacker live now in a minute. Before we run it, I want to give you how to run Nettacker, running Nettacker 101. So in order to run Nettacker, you need to remember that you need to provide it with at least 2 parameters, right? So it needs to have a target. What are you going to scan? What do you want to scan? And you need to give it the module or the method. What scanning method do you want to use? So for example, if you are scanning just one IP address, you would define the IP address and -i parameter, and then -m, you will say, okay, for example, you want to use port scan. You can also scan the whole network if you define as your target network range, for example, CIDR in this case. I will talk about Nettacker targets a little bit later. Now, let me switch to my Kali Linux installation here, okay, where I already have Nettacker installed. Let me log in. Okay, so this is my live Kali Linux. So you can see I'm currently in the Nettacker folder. And if I list the contents, you can see there's some Python files in here. And this is the software written in Python. So how do we run it? We use Python. I can use Python 3, for example, nettacker.py. If I don't provide any parameters, remember when I started my presentation, as you can see, Nettacker just spits out its usage, and you can read about all these modules here. Okay, so that it just shows you all the list of the modules, and you can see you can specify the modules, and you can also include or exclude some of the modules as well. Okay, so let's do a port scan as an example. So as I said, we need to define the target. So let me define, for example, OWASP.org. Yeah, I'm allowed to scan OWASP because it has a bug bounty program. Again, a reminder, only scan targets that you are allowed to scan, or the ones which have bug bounty programs which have a policy allowing bug bounty researchers to perform security scans. Okay, so if I run it here, you will see that OWASP Nettacker will start. It will show the version number, and it will say that the engine started. It will check that it's running the latest version. It will tell you how many modules are loaded, and it will say what is it actually submitted. So what happens is the target actually goes into the engine, and the engine can then run the variety of modules, and you can choose whichever modules you want in the -m parameter. Okay, so this is how it works from the usage. So let me just see if I can actually. Okay, there you go. So it's just finished here, and you can see that OWASP.org, it found port 80, port 443, and port 53. You can see that the output from Nettacker, it always comes in this tabular format. So it shows you the host. It also shows the username and password. So username and password columns are for brute forcing attacks. So if we were performing brute forcing for a specific username and password, if there was a hit, so basically if the particular combination of username and passwords worked, it would be displayed here. You can see there's a port here, whichever port was open. You can see which type or which module was used, port scan, and there's some information about description. So you can see this is actually HTTP, and there's a time when that particular open port was discovered. This is a timestamp. So we can also scan a, let me just try another one. I'm gonna try to run a port scan on a IP address. For example, like this. I think this is the one that I need. Again, I can go and define port scan. Okay. Okay, so this is a, hopefully this is one of my virtual machines which are running. Yeah, there you go. And you can see it's very quickly discovered all the running ports and told us this is telnets on RPC, SSH, and there's a port 8083 open. So you can see how easily it can be used against the different targets. Now, how do we define the targets? There are different ways how you can define targets in Nettacker. So first of all, you can define just a single IP address as a target. You can define a range of IP addresses with the beginning and with a start and end IP address. You can also define the whole CIDR range, the whole network. You can also define a domain name, like I just done with OWASP.org. For the modules which do anything with HTTP protocol, you can use a URL. So for example, http OWASP.org or https OWASP.org. So you can provide also your list like that. There's another cool thing that you can do with Nettacker. You can provide it a list of targets using -l command. So why is this useful? For example, of course, one of the great things about Nettacker is that you can run it on your network in your organization. Again, for example, to do information gathering, to do recon, asset discovery. And what you can do, you can compile a text file where you would put all your network ranges, for example. So usually a large organization would have many networks, many subnets, might have different domain names as well. So you can put them all into one text file and you can just load them all from that list. It is also useful if you are, for example, performing a penetration testing tasks and you want to load a list of targets to run a particular module or a combination of modules on that list of targets. So this is a very, very useful feature. Next thing I want to talk to you is about chaining methods. So this is where we can pull multiple blades out of our Swiss Army knife. So what you can do with modules is you can list several modules using a comma. So for example, you could see I run a port scan, but I could also, for example, combine it with the phpMyAdmin scan if I wanted to. And here's an example where I could perform a subdomain scan on OWASP.org and also perform a server version vuln. So you can do, you can have any combination you want, and obviously you can choose the combination that is relevant for your particular task that you are trying to do. But obviously listing modules using a comma all the time, it can become quite tiring, right? So that's why Nettacker has profiles, and it already comes with predefined profiles, and profiles are basically just a list of modules which will be used together. There is a predefined profile called info for information gathering, so it will do things like port scanning. There is one for scan, so this one will actually pull all the modules of type scan. There's a profile called brute, and that will forcing modules. Same with vuln, so that will find all the vulnerability scanning modules. There is also a profile called WP for WordPress, so that will utilize all the WordPress related modules. There's one for Joomla, again, that will use all the Joomla related modules. And there is a very useful profile called all. That means you can actually use all the modules on the target if you don't know what you're looking for. And you can just unleash everything. Of course, all the modules on the target will take quite a long time to run, but you can do that. And also, if you remember when we looked at the actual list of the commands that you can run in Nettacker command line, you have an option of excluding modules. So this is exactly for the situation when you run all modules and say, I want to run everything except this, this, and this one, because it doesn't make sense. Yeah, for example, if you are testing something which doesn't have, and you know for a fact doesn't have any telnet or FTP ports open, you can just exclude telnet and FTP related modules. There's also a useful wizard. Again, if you don't want to remember how to run or how to use Nettacker, you can just run it with -w in the command line for wizard, and it will interactively ask you several questions on what is the target, what do you want to scan, how many threads do you want, how many threads per host you want, where do you want to save the results, etc., etc. Okay, so let's have a look at another live demo. Okay, let's go back to our Kali Linux. Okay, this is where we have Nettacker. So let me show you something very useful. First of all, I want to show you how to find all the subdomains of a target. So let's have a look at OWASP.org again, because that's a most popular target today, and I want to run a subdomain scan. So this is very similar to sublister, for example. There you go. You can see how quickly Nettacker discovered all the subdomains of OWASP.org, and they all there. Yeah, that's it. Right. I want to try something which is not necessarily OWASP.org, because OWASP has only a handful of subdomains. Let's see how many subdomains. It found 36 subdomains. Demo it on something which has much more subdomains. One other popular target that I usually use during demos is Uber, again, because Uber has a bug bounty policy, which allows security researchers to perform scans. But actually, subdomain scan is a passive scan. It doesn't actually connect. So we are not even going to disturb the infrastructure. We're just going to go and try to discover all the subdomains. And Uber is actually a massive target because it has lots of subdomains. So you can see like 800 something subdomains, and they are all here. Okay, so one other thing that I wanted to show you is that how you can combine the subdomain scan. This is the coolest thing about Nettacker, is that it can combine the subdomain scan with another module. And the way how you can do it is you can perform a particular scan. So let me run a server version vuln. And I'm going to run it on, for example, OWASP.org first. And then, okay, I want to add X powered by scan. So what it's going to do, it's going to contact OWASP.org and try to find out what's the server and or server version being leaked in its response headers, if there's an X powered by. And it's actually a vuln, not a scan, because that's a vulnerability. So first I'm going to do it just on OWASP.org, so you can see how it works. And you can see just OWASP.org website says, oh, there's a server version vuln, so it's running on Cloudflare. So that's what's they're responding on the server. And you can see expired ranks and CW. Okay, so but that is just on OWASP.org as a host. What we can do with Nettacker, we can add -s command line option, and what that will do, that will run whatever modules we have listed here on all the subdomains of our target. This is where it gets really, really cool, and this is where it's advantages versus other tools like Nmap can be seen. And you can see how quickly it discovers all the subdomains of OWASP.org, connects to them, and pulls the results. There you go. But this is not everything. You can see we get this report in a text format again on the command line. But you can see after Nettacker has finished working, it says that the report saved in this file, which is an HTML and database. So this is what's great about Nettacker. It has a built-in database. Every single scan that you do is not lost. It is stored in the database. And also it can be displayed. It is also in there. It goes into the report. So by default, the report format is HTML. So let's see if we can have a look at this HTML file. I think there's a Firefox here on Kali Linux, and let's see if I can open that file with Firefox. Oh, I think copied some extra characters here. Let me get rid of them. Okay, as a Firefox opening, and here you can see the report which was saved, and you can see this wonderful penetration testing graph. So you can see Nettacker started its attack. See, this is the coolest thing about Nettacker, is it creates this graph for you. And you can see the attack was started, and it contacted this subdomain, then the next subdomain, and on each of the subdomains, these modules were run, and these ports were open. And you can see also what was the description in each of them for the each vulnerability. Username and password, as you can see, is blank, as you know, because we're not doing any brute forcing. And for example, here we're seeing that there is actually a specific version of Atlassian proxy 1.19.3.1 being displayed. So this is very, very useful. And you can look at the graph and inspect it and quickly see if there is something unusual here. So for example, I can see that OCMS OWASP.org target, right, did not have X-powered by vulnerability. It only had the server version vulnerability. You can see there's only one line going there, and that's the actually the Atlassian proxy one. And the results are also displayed in HTML format in this HTML table, so you can inspect it like this. And there is a bit of a visual effect. So if you want to look at a particular line, all the other lines in that table are blurred. So this is very useful. Okay, so this is our HTML report. And again, reminder, this is absolutely free and open source software. Okay, so let's have a look at these reports then a bit more in depth. So Nettacker has these graphs, which are very useful. There are different types of graphs, which are saved in HTML file when you use the HTML output. There's a D3 tree V1, V2, but there's also a circular graph as well. If you are interested in how the nodes are connected, sometimes the circle graph can be quite useful. And you can change which graph you want by using -- graph command line option. Of course, we've seen the HTML version of the output, but the greatest advantage of Nettacker is that it can also output the results in JSON and in CSV format. So JSON is very useful if you are combining and integrating Nettacker with some other security and not necessarily security tools, because JSON is a structured data format, and it can be consumed by another tools in the pipeline or on your tool chain. And of course, CSV is great because it is a format that you can open in a spreadsheet, and this is absolutely great. So let me show you how you can get that result in a spreadsheet. Let's switch back to our Kali Linux, and I'm going to repeat the same command that I've just done. So I'm going to do the same scan, but I'm going to change the output of the report. For this, I'm going to use the -o command, and I'm going to add report .csv. So I have to define the name. So if I were to define the HTML, the report would be saved in HTML format. If I change the extension to JSON, it automatically saves in JSON. And if I add CSV, it will generate the CSV file. So there you go. You can see the Nettacker started and says, if you want to use graph feature, the output must end with .html or .htm. And of course, we said, no, we're using CSV. So of course, there will be no graph inside the CSV file. Okay, so we have it run, it's completed, and says report saved and report CSV in database. Okay, so here in my Kali Linux, I have my LibreOffice, which is a free version of Office for Linux. And I want to have a look at this report.csv. Okay, it's opening. And it says, okay, there's a text file which you want to import into the spreadsheet. And yes, lo and behold, we have a spreadsheet. And how cool is that? So we can have the results of our vulnerability scan. As you can see, there are several columns that I'm going to delete. For example, there was a scan ID, which just had a unique ID I don't need. I want to get rid of this name password. But these are very, very useful. So you can see I got a spreadsheet format here. And because this is now technically speaking in a spreadsheet format, we can manipulate it. So for example, I can filter this data. If I enable my filter and I say, okay, I want to find out all OWASP subdomains in the scan which were running Nginx, right? So I can go and say, okay, let me show me all the Nginx ones. And there you go. That was secure flag, OWASP.org. And then if I say, okay, it'll show me what was running a Atlassian proxy. And yeah, and there you go. It will show me everything which was running Atlassian proxy. I can clean the filters, for example, and I want to, for example, I want to have a look at everything which was running on port 80, right? I can go and say, okay, show me everything where port 80 was open. So there you go. This is all the port 80 open. And you can see what was discovered on this port 80. So there was X-powered by vulnerability and server version vulnerability. You can see all the targets here. And in this case, of course, these are all subdomains. So this is very, very useful. You can see we discovered all the subdomains of OWASP and what is running, what are the open ports, and what sort of server version and X-powered by headers are on the targets. So this is absolutely the greatest thing about Nettacker. I don't know any other open source tool which does this. Name me a tool. This is very useful for you in your organizations. If you want to go and scan your network with a free and open source tool, and within minutes or maybe seconds, it gives you a spreadsheet. This is absolutely great. It's a great for management and just generate great format for your data. Currently, as you know, there's a bit of a problem consuming data from security tools. So, for example, Nmap only produces an XML output, but from Nettacker, you get JSON and you get CSV, which is great. So why is it also great? Is because it solves a very important problem in cybersecurity, and that is a problem of the asset management and asset inventory. If you know Jeremiah Grossman, one of the famous cybersecurity guys and the founders of White Hat Security, and our application security industry legend, he tweeted something interesting back in 2017 when we had new OWASP Top 10 prepared. And he said, I suggest that OWASP Top 10 2017 must include A0 or asset inventory, because these days the biggest AppSec risk are websites you don't know you own. So basically, if you don't know what you own, how can you secure it? Right. So this is a very big problem, and we're seeing it over and over and over again as cybersecurity professionals. Ask yourself, do you know all the assets that you have on the network? Do you know all the servers? Do you know all your subdomains? Do you know what open ports are on each of the servers? If you don't, then now there's a free and open source tool which can help you to deal with that. The next great thing about Nettacker is its WebUI or API. So command line is one thing, but obviously it's not very convenient. And if you want to run it as a sort of cool web-based scanner, you can. And to start Nettacker in an API mode, all you have to do is just use the command --start API. You can configure the API host and API port parameters. By default, Nettacker will run on 127.0.0.1 and the port will be 5000. And you can also define an API access key. If you don't define an access key for your API, Nettacker will randomly generate one. And you can have some other options. For example, you can define whitelist, how to connect to it. And let me show you how it works. So when you start Nettacker in the API mode, or to use WebUI, it will launch Flask web server, and it will give you this API key. When you need to copy and paste this API key in order to be able to use it. Let me show you how it works and why is this so cool. Switching to Kali Linux again. Okay, so my Python Nettacker, I'm not going to run it with any of these command lines. Instead, I'm going to say --start API. Okay, so as you can see now, nothing's happening. It says, oh, I'm running on HTTPS 127.0.0.1 5000. Press Control-C to quit, but it gives us an API key. Let's copy this key and let's open a web browser. On Kali Linux, we have Firefox. And let's connect to this IP address and port number. Okay, HTTPS, oops, typing in the wrong place. HTTPS 127.0.0.1 port 5000. 5000. Okay, we get a security warning because Nettacker's SSL certificate is self-signed. You can provide your own certificate if you want. We can accept the risks and continue. And what we will see now, we will see the Nettacker WebUI. This is what it looks like. And as you can see, we it has several buttons. So there's tutorial, crawler, results, and new scan. And there's an API key field here. And there's a set session button. So without an API key, you can't do much. It will tell you login, please log in first. So let me go and paste that API key and set the session. Says success, your session updated. So we are now logged in. So first I want to show you the results button. You will see all the scans that we have done before. They will be shown here already in the web UI, which is very, very useful. Again, remember we looked, for example, at the OWASP.org server version 1. The scan is in the database, so I can just access it. Here it is, it's here. If I click on it, I'll get the HTML report. Same thing with all the other previous scans that we've done. They are saved in the database. But what I want to show you is that from WebUI, you can also run a new scan as well, which is also really cool. This is what it looks like. You can define your targets. For example, you can go and say 192.168.132.174. Press enter and it creates a target. If I want to add another target, I can just say, okay, just do me OWASP.org, right? And you can add any other targets that you want. So this is very useful. Okay, and then from here you define your scan methods, your modules, and you can see these are the profiles. You can see they're all color coded, and you can see that, for example, all the vulnerability modules are color coded red because they do something potentially intrusive and dangerous. All the modules which perform scanning are color coded green, and all the brute forcing modules are color coded orange. Okay. And you can also, as remember as mentioned, there's a WordPress and Joomla profiles that you can select as well, which already have a bundled modules for WordPress and Joomla, which is really, really cool. You can also select your graphs here. There you go. These are your various types of graphs. Let me actually see if I can use this circle graph. I don't want to use it on OWASP.org. Let's just see if I can do it on my local machine. 92.168.132.174. This was my demo vulnerable application. Okay, and let's see if I can scan this. If I click on, oh, it says choose your scan method. Yes, I wanted to do port scan. Yeah, but again, I could choose several ones as well if I want to, but in this particular case, I just want to do a port scan. Okay, because I want to see with this circle graph. Okay, so you can see what's happening is a success request submitted. So it goes into the API and the engine now is going to run the scan. To see the scan, we need to go into the results, and then we need to have a look at the results here. If the results are not ready, you can click on the reload or last updates page, so you can bring the results. But fortunately, this one was very, very quick. We can see it's completed. You can see the difference between the scan that I've just run. It says scan CMD through the OWASP Nettacker API. So WebUI knows that the scan was done from the API. But for example, the previous one was done from the command line. And you can see which command line was used. You can also see when it says events number, so how many results we have. So we have 4 results here. So let's click on it, and there you go. So this is the type of the different type of graph that you can have if you are interested in this particular graph. And you can also see that all the ports here, which was 23, 112, 22, and 80, 83. Next cool thing about WebUI is its crawler, and the crawler is the search engine, and you can go and search for anything you had scanned before. So for example, I want to find out everything which is running Nginx, right? So I can go and search for it, and it says, oh, there you go, secure flag OWASP.org was running Nginx. I can go and say, I want to find out everything which had port 8083 open, and there you go, it says this was the target. I want to find out everything which was running Atlassian, right? And there you go, you can see this was CMS and contact OWASP.org. So this is very, very useful. Everything which was had port 443 open. So this is a search engine, and you can find it very, very quickly and easily. Of course, another cool thing, from any of these previous scans, you get the get JSON and get CSV buttons here. So you can, for example, this particular last port scan that we run, if we want to get it into its CSV format, I can just click on the CSV. It's going to download the CSV file, and let's see if I open it with LibreOffice. This is the one we just had the port numbers on my vulnerable VM. There you go. And we got the CSV straight away. So why is this useful? Again, so you get a WebUI interface with this tool where you can spin this up in a Docker. I will show you how to spin this up in a Docker. Within seconds, you get this WebUI. You can log into it using the session. And once you're there, you can run whatever scans you want on your network. So you can have it running on your network. And then you use the crawler as kind of your internal Shodan kind of search engine. So you can go and search your network for scan results on your network for any particular results that you're interested in. This is really, really cool. And it is free, right? So that is the greatest advantage of it. I want to show you something else as well. And I want to show you another module. Let's see if this works. I want to show you this module on Uber, right? So one thing that when we looked at Uber, let me actually show you maybe the list of all the Uber subdomains first. Again, let me run it in API. Maybe I closed it a bit too early. Let's copy that API key. And let me open the Firefox again, the browser. There's a different key this time. As you can see, every time you start it, it's a different key. Okay, let's accept the risk, get to our WebUI. I want to show you something interesting. I want to show you one of the WordPress modules. So if we look at the results, right? If we go back to the one that are done on Uber, which was this one, you can see 812 subdomains. This is lots of Uber subdomains here, right? As I know, I ran the scan previously. It will take some time, so I'm not going to do it because of the time. But I've noticed that some of the subdomains were running WordPress. For example, this one, engineering.uber.com, was running WordPress. So what I'm interested in finding out if there are any plugins on this instance of WordPress which had vulnerabilities. So Nettacker comes with a list of WordPress plugins which previously had any known vulnerabilities, and you can run a scan like this. So how can we do this? Okay, so I'm going to launch Nettacker, and as a target, I think let's try there's Eng and engineering. I think it's the same thing, uber.com, and as a module, I want to run let's say server version 1, first of all, but then I want to run a WordPress plugin scan. Let's see if this produces anything. Okay, so you can see that it's running Nginx, right? So this is right, and you can see WordPress plugin scan found that it's actually running a plugin called TablePress. And that is a plugin which was previously known to have a vulnerability. Of course, it doesn't show if this current version is vulnerable. That is a thing for us to implement in the future, but this is very quick, and you can see how quickly it went through all the plugins in that WordPress installation to find them. Another thing that I want to do with this version or with this installation of WordPress, I want to see if this instance is leaking its WordPress users. So there is a WordPress user enum scan. Okay, let's try to use this. So that will try to enumerate the users, and you can see it was actually successful. And you can see these are the names of the WordPress users at this anguber.com instance. There's Adam Wang, Adam Foster, Abhishek Modi, Abhishek Gupta. Look at all these people. These are all the usernames which are present on this instance of WordPress. So this is just a simple example. And the last thing I want to show you is how to do brute forcing. Okay, so cool thing about Nettacker is that you can do brute force horizontally and vertically. So you can, for example, load a list of the usernames and passwords into Nettacker, load a dictionary, and perform a brute force using either a combination of usernames and passwords, or just usernames, or just passwords. So let me show you this. So on my vulnerable VM here, as we have seen in the port scan, port 22 was open, right? So SSH is running. So what I want to do is I want to see if I can brute force this vulnerable VM. So I'm going to use SSH root module. Okay, and what we can do, we can then define which username and password we want. For example, we can try it with something like root, right? And -u is the username that we want to brute force with, and -p lowercase is a specific password that we want to brute force with. But what you can do is you can change the lowercase to uppercase, and that means load passwords from external file, for example, passwords.txt. Right, and it will basically brute force with a user root, but all the passwords will be loaded from password.txt. And similarly, you can change the small u to uppercase U, and you can load your dictionary of usernames from usernames.txt, right? And of course, this text files can be anywhere. You can load your dictionaries. So this is essentially how the brute forcing works, and it's the same syntax for all the brute forcing modules, whether that's SSH, Telnet, SMTP, or HTTP, basic auth, or NTLM. There are 8 brute forcing methods available in Nettacker. So in this particular case, what I want to do is I want to actually let me just run it without everything, because there's a default small dictionary which is available by default in Nettacker. Let's see if that produces anything. That has some popular combination, but what you can also do is you can define the combination and you can scan everything on your network, and this is a different different way of doing it. Which is very, very good. And as I said, for example, if you want to scan the whole network for a particular default credentials, this is where it is the most useful thing. Right, let's see if it's actually running, because it was supposed to find it already. So that is my VM. Let me just try and see if it is working. I hope so. No, I think it doesn't have the default. So I'm going to show you something else. I'm going to show you load. Well, I can load from the list, but I think what I want to try to do is I want to try to scan the whole network. So let me try the whole network, 132/24 network, and I want to brute force it. Check if any device on my network actually has the username of admin and the password of admin. Okay, and that is a little bit more interesting test, and I want to run it with 100 threads and 50 threads per module. As you can see, what it's doing now is now going to try to connect via SSH to all the devices on the network, and will try to log in with these defined credentials that I defined. And then now it's scanning everything. You can see it's now scanning 255 devices on my network. And if it is successful, I got success. So it managed to log in to one of the devices using admin. And when it finishes in a second, we will see which device was vulnerable. There you go. And that was this particular IP address. So you can see this is where username and password is in use. And we can see that the description is logged in successfully using sshroot. So we scanned the whole network and we found one device using this brute force method, which is great. So to finish off, I wanted to, of course, tell you about that the web UI is great and it's very useful if you just want to tick things. Database, so Nettacker comes with SQLite by default as the database. You can configure it in your organization to run with MySQL or with Postgres. There is a link how to do it on the wiki. If you know what Maltego is, it's a tool which comes with Kali for the Recon. Nettacker has modules, transforms for Maltego. And for example, this shows how you can choose OWASP.org and then right click and choose some of the Nettacker scan transforms, which will appear here in your Maltego. And it will be shown like this graph in Maltego. Again, because I'm running short of time, I'm not going to show this to you. The cool thing I want to talk to you about is about the Microsoft Exchange Server vulnerability. As you know, this year, one of the biggest talked about cybersecurity event was the Hafnium hack, where attackers, which were purportedly Chinese, managed to exploit a SSRF vulnerability in Exchange server, and that is a really bad vulnerability, allowing to take over the Exchange server and then infiltrate networks. And this was basically the biggest news in cybersecurity, and it was so big that I think unprecedented move. The FBI decided to actually started hacking into US organizations which haven't patched the Exchange servers and patching them by hacking, which is really, really strange, but that's a true story. So what we had with Nettacker, when we learned about this vulnerability, we built a module, and we built a vul module, which is called MS Exchange CV 2021-26855. That's the name of the vulnerability. And you can see here, I tweeted about this straight away. So I think the vulnerability was announced, I think, on March 14th. By March 17th, we had that module. And I wrote a blog article about it, how you can detect. And I had lots of thanks, because there were people from various countries who were scanning like all the IP addresses in the country to discover the vulnerable Exchange servers. And you can same thing do in your organizational networks, because there are many big organizations which run multiple Web Outlook or Exchange servers. And using Nettacker, they managed to discover them. And this is what it would look like. And it say, there you go, this is the target vulnerable to the Exchange server SSRS vulnerability. And it's just like any other module. So this was a very, very useful module, which made a lot of noise in the media. The next successful module was the Citrix CVE, which happened last year in January, when Citrix devices had vulnerability allowing attackers to hack into your VPN. Similarly, this module allowed many organizations for absolutely free to scan their network and find vulnerable Citrix devices which have not yet been patched. And that's what it would look like. It was Citrix CV 2019-19781. And again, Nettacker could detect them very easily. So some use cases. So you can use Nettacker for asset discovery. You can scan your network for open ports, for hosts. You can scan it for default credentials, like I show you admin, but again, you can brute force with any credentials. You can scan network for specific vulnerability, like for example, this Microsoft Exchange CVE. You can monitor subdomains and open ports on them. You can discover SSL certificates which are expired, find subdomains which are hosting vulnerable versions of WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla. So there are some useful commands here. So the ones that I ran today, for example, I found all the subdomains and managed to grab all the banners and XPowered by from OWASP.org. Then I managed to find all the web services, and you can find all the web services on your network, find out what is running. This is a useful command, how to find out if there are any expired certificate on the network. Just use SSL certificate expired module. Again, if you're going to do it, make sure you use the multi-threading commands. So an attacker runs a bit faster with multiple threads. You can detect WordPress versions on your subdomains. This is the command that I use for brute forcing, by checking if any of the devices on the network have admin as the SSH credentials. And Last thing I want to talk to you is about contribution. So we welcome developers. Before you contribute, please read the developer wiki because that contains contributor guidelines. And yeah, submit your pull request and we'll review it. So thank you very much. And now I'm open to any Q&A.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was an awesome demo, awesome tool. I am already having lots and lots of ideas about doing automated security testing along with Recon, along with vulnerability testing. Let me check on our YouTube if we are having any questions there. I have a small question for you.
Okay.
Just like in OWASP Zap, we have some a way by we could open Zap over the API, and then we could query Zap through that API, and basically it helps in doing automated CI/CD integration. So do we have something of that sort in OWASP Nettacker?
Nettacker has an API, so you can launch it with an API. But I'm not sure if it's useful, particularly for CI/CD, for your pipeline integration.
Okay.
There's some things that you can check. For example, you can check for default credentials, or you can check for the server version vuln. For example, one example that I can think of is just to make sure that they disable the server banners, for example. But because this is more useful for in the network security and bug bounty and penetration testing examples rather than in CI/CD, because there are some vulnerabilities that they can check similar to ZAP. For example, if it can check for coarse vulnerabilities, some cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. It can also, for example, has a module for GraphQL, which can find vulnerable GraphQL endpoints. Directory scan module can also find any forgotten exposed directories or admin directories. So yeah, you can use it, and of course the API is there and it's available, and you can launch it with any API in your CI/CD and
Right.
use the results.
Right. That's overall, Sam. Thank you so much for coming to OWASP Karachi and showing what Nettacker can do. I'm pretty sure many security professionals would be having loads and loads of ideas. I'm also amazed by its capabilities. What can I do? It is definitely much more than having just some tools like Nmap or like Sublister or like OWASP Zap. It's one hell of a Swiss Army knife. One hell of a Swiss Army knife.
One of the
I
greatest things that, since you mentioned Sublister, right? So basically it's the subdomain scan is the most useful thing, because you can combine any other module. You can combine port scan with subdomain scan, right? And it's all in one, because usually when doing penetration tests, you need to download and use many tools. You need to know how to integrate them together. And then if you want to get, for example, a spreadsheet result to show to your manager, right, it gets even more complicated. So Nettacker solves all these problems because it's all in one, right? One Swiss Army knife kind of tool. And you can, for example, enumerate all subdomains. On each subdomain, you can port scan, you can perform vulnerability scanner, you can find expired certificates, you can try to brute force users, you can try to brute force WordPress plugins or users, and it's all in one tool. And then you get the output in a spreadsheet. And you don't even need to use a command line. As I showed you, you have a web UI. And another cool thing that you can do, again, let me share my screen again and show you that you can, how quickly you can run it with Docker. Again, assuming you guys don't have Python, right? Or because it's and you just want to use Docker. Let me just spin up the Docker container, so I can go and say Docker compose up, right? Oh, yeah. I have to do a sudo, right? Because it requires a root privileges. Okay. Let's see. So it now builds the Docker container for us. And you can see it's now going to install everything that Nettacker needs into this Docker container. And once it finishes, it will spin up a WebUI. You can see how quickly it is. So this is just the first time when you run. Of course, it needs to install it. Second time when you run it, it doesn't need to do it. It will spin up straight away. Let's wait for this to finish, and then once it's done, it's just gonna wait and on port 5000 for you to connect, and that's what is the great thing. So you can have this in running in Docker within minutes, and you can start scanning your network for vulnerabilities, for subdomains, for open ports, and again, you can run it in your network. I had people who basically have this Docker spun up in the network, and they keep scanning and use it instead of Nmap and instead of some other commercial scanners, because of course it's free, and if you know what you're after, you can get this very quickly from OWASP Nettacker as well. So as you can see, it's now building. It's building the container for us, and of course it's only does it for the first time. I'll run it again so you can see that second time it doesn't do it, but once it finishes, it will just start running Flask, and there you go. That's it. You can see it's now running. You can see the API key here. It gives an API key, so it's ready. So I'm actually going to Control C. I'm going to stop it because it was the first time we ran it. It was building it. Yeah, if I run it again, once of course it starts the container, you will see that it no longer. Okay, so let's say we run it once. I want to run it one more time. Okay, and there you go. That's done. That's it. This is how quickly you can have it run it in your network. There you go. And it gives me the API key. Say, yep, I want this API key. I imagine I just spun up this Docker on my network, and this is how quickly I can just go and connect to it. There you go. Say HTTPS 127.0.1.5000. There you go, advanced, and there you go. On my network straight away with Docker, I have the WebUI of Nettacker, and I just paste my API key, and now I have an absolutely free open source scanner ready to go, and I can go and say, yeah, I want to do a new scan, and say, what do you want to scan? And I can go and say, okay, I want to scan, I don't know, uber.com. And I want to scan server version vuln and to find out all the server versions on Uber. And I can click on the advanced tab, and I can say, okay, I want to check subdomains, right? And these are my threads. If I were performing brute forcing, I can do passwords and usernames. But there you go. This is how quickly you can do it. It submits it into the API, and it's ready to go, right? This is how quickly and how easily you can do it in Docker. You can see it takes seconds to spin up, and then you just wait for the results. Again, if you scan something big, obviously I scanned this time a very big target, which is Uber, which is going to take a few minutes. But obviously, if you're scanning your local network, it's there, and obviously once it's available, you can just open your results and download them as CSV and use it as a spreadsheet straight away. So again, that is the advantage of this tool. And again, I'm not sure if there's anything else which is free, open source, and as easy to use as this. Of course, as I showed you here, it's as simple as just ticking the boxes. What do you want to scan? So you want to say, I want that. You can just tick the boxes, define your targets, and a few minutes later, you have your results available.
Definitely, Sam. Sam, thank you so much. It appears that I do not have any more questions from my viewers. Thank you so much for coming to OWASP Karachi and showcasing the product of OWASP Nettacker. Thank you, Sam. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.